The light came down like a scalpel. That was the word Maren Solis used later when the Colonial Board asked her to describe it. Not a beam, not a flash. A scalpel, precise, cold, and interested. Like something on the other end of it was making a decision about what to keep. She had been standing at the tree line with Dax when it happened. They had driven out to the old relay tower on the edge of Callum's Basin to run maintenance checks, same as they did every third week. The tower was 40 meters of rusted lattice and blinking red lights, surrounded by the thick amber-leafed cova trees that covered most of Halcyon's northern ridge. It was a quiet night, the kind of quiet that colonial settlers got drunk on. No traffic noise, no industrial hum, just wind off the ridge and the occasional low chirp of burrowing skeins in the underbrush. Dax had been telling her about his sister back on Earth. She was getting married. He was going to miss it. He laughed about it in the way people laugh about things that actually hurt them, which was the way Dax laughed about most things. He had that quality. He could take a wound and turn it into a joke before it finished bleeding. Then the light came down. It was blue-white, the color of a welding arc, but it didn't burn. It came straight through the cova canopy without disturbing a single leaf, and it found Dax like it already knew his name. He didn't scream. That was the thing Maren could never stop seeing when she closed her eyes. He didn't scream, didn't fall, didn't even flinch. He just looked up. Half a second, he turned to her with an expression she'd never seen on him before, something that wasn't surprise or fear, but closer to recognition, as though a piece of a dream he'd forgotten was suddenly returning to him. Then he was gone. The light folded closed like a hand and Dax Okafor was not there anymore. Maren stood in the dark for a long time before she started screaming. The Colonial Board ruled it an atmospheric electrical event. A rare ionic column discharge, they said. Not unheard of in high-altitude settlements with unstable magnetosphere gradients. The documentation was thorough, and the language was precise, and it was completely wrong, and Maren knew it was completely wrong, and they knew she knew, and none of it mattered. Dax was gone and there was no body and no wreckage and no evidence of anything except her testimony and a single scorched circle in the clay soil where he had been standing. She requested a survey of the area, denied. She filed for an independent investigation, reviewed and tabled. She started keeping records of her own. Atmospheric readings, electromagnetic signatures, satellite thermal logs she pulled from the relay station archives. She put them in a folder she kept on a drive she wore around her neck. 2 years passed. Maren still worked maintenance on the relay network. It was methodical work that let her mind run while her hands stayed busy, which was what she needed. She had nosebleeds sometimes, which the colony medic attributed to altitude and stress. She had dreams she couldn't fully remember, just impressions mostly, cold and dark, and a sound like static that almost resolved into language. She started learning Veil signal theory in her spare time, reading everything the Colonial Xenobiology Archive had on documented non-human contact events, most of which was classified well above her clearance level, and which she accessed anyway through channels she would not describe to anyone. The Veil were not well understood. What the archive had was mostly secondhand. Reports from the Frontier Survey missions, xenobiological assessments from the Kepler contact events, heavily redacted incident reports from a mining colony in the Yantis system that had gone dark 11 years ago. What the archive consistently described was this. The Veil did not have bodies. They were a distributed neural presence, a consciousness that existed in the spaces between things, in electromagnetic fields and quantum carrier waves. They experienced the physical universe as data. And occasionally, very occasionally, when they found something interesting in the physical universe, took a sample. Maren read that line, took a sample, and sat very still for a while. It was a pair of trappers who found him. Brun and Corsa ran a line of snares through the northern Cova forest, checking them every few days for the burrowing skeins whose fur the colony's textile mill paid decent money for. They almost walked past him. He was lying in the shallow depression between two root formations, and he was coated in something that looked like the secretion left behind when you peeled biosynthetic packaging foam, thick, translucent, faintly luminescent. He was naked. He was breathing. Brun nudged him with the barrel of his trapping rifle. Dax Okafor opened his eyes. His first word was Marin's name. They brought him to the colony medical station and Dr. Vasic ran the standard battery of tests and found nothing physiologically wrong beyond mild dehydration and some unusual protein concentrations in cerebrospinal fluid that she flagged for further analysis. Dax was coherent. He answered questions. He said he didn't remember anything after the light, that everything between that moment at the tower and waking up in the forest was just white. A white so complete it wasn't even empty. It was full of something he couldn't name. He said he felt fine. He ate 2 full meals. He asked for coffee. The message came to Marin's terminal at 0340 that night. He's back. She sat on the edge of her bunk and read it 3 times. She should have felt relief. She knew the shape of relief. She had felt it before, after bad situations on maintenance runs, after close calls. This wasn't it. What she felt was something closer to the cold settling of a weight she had been holding without knowing it. She put the drive with her research around her neck. Then she picked up her toolkit and walked to the medical station. Vasic met her at the door and told her Dax had been discharged. He'd insisted. Said he wanted to sleep in his own bunk. Vasic had let him go because there was nothing to hold him for, and he was a grown adult, and the tests showed nothing. Marin asked for a copy of the protein analysis. Vasic hesitated, then sent it. Marin read it walking back across the compound in the dark. Protein sequences were not flagged in any colonial medical database. Because they were not in any colonial medical database. They were not human proteins. They were not any cataloged biology's proteins. They were something the sequencer had rendered in approximation, because it lacked the framework to render them exactly, like trying to describe a color that had no name. She started running. The first death was found the next morning. Harlow Dryce, the night watch operator at the water reclamation plant on the colony's eastern perimeter. He was found by the morning shift with his head caved in, the method blunt and precise and without apparent passion. The kind of violence that comes from something that has studied what killing looks like, has not yet internalized why it is supposed to feel like anything. The security team found boot prints in the reclaimed water mud that matched a pair of colony-issue boots Dax had been given when discharged from medical. The colony director, a careful man named Vetch, who had spent 20 years managing resource sites and believed in procedure above almost everything, locked down the compound and issued a security warrant for Dax Okafor's detention. Marin went to Dax's bunk quarters first. She stood outside the door for a moment with her hand on her toolkit, inside of which, under the torque wrenches and the diagnostic tablets, was a disruption coil she had assembled herself from relay station components, capable of generating a short-range electromagnetic pulse, strong enough to knock out any wireless system within 10 meters. She didn't know if it would work on the VL. She didn't know much. But she had read enough of the Yantis incident reports to have a working theory, and the theory was this. The Veil didn't destroy what they took. They wore it. They used the host nervous system as a platform, the host memory as a map, and they spread by proximity, some kind of bioelectromagnetic signal that the infected body transmitted and that unshielded human nervous systems, operating at the right frequency and close enough range, could receive, could absorb, could be rewritten by. She knocked. No answer. She used her maintenance override to open the door. The room was empty. The window was open. The sheets were undisturbed. Dax, or what was occupying Dax, had not slept. On the small shelf above the bunk, the only personal item Dax had in his quarters was a photograph. Him and his sister at their parents' property back on Earth, standing in front of a badly maintained fence, both of them laughing at something off-frame. Marin stood looking at it for too long. She took the photograph. She found the shed by following the signal. This was the part she had not anticipated and could not entirely explain. The dreams had been getting stronger for the past 24 hours, since Dax had returned. Not clearer, still mostly impression and static, but stronger in the way a radio signal gets stronger as you approach the transmitter. She had started to understand that this was intentional. The veil occupying Dax was broadcasting, and some residue of Dax's neural map, his genuine history with Marin, the pathways of years of friendship, was acting as a tuning fork. She was receiving something she was not meant to be able to receive. This was, she thought, The Veil's first miscalculation. The shed was on the colony's agricultural margin, 160 meters beyond the outermost perimeter fence, used for equipment storage during the off-growing season. It was locked from the outside. Struck her as careful. The Veil had learned something about how humans used physical security, had chosen a space and secured it. Methodical. Logical. The smell reached her before she got to the door. Not rot. Something else. Something organic and sealed like the inside of a cocoon, which was exactly what it was. She cut the lock with the magnetic shearer from her kit and opened the door. There were 6 of them. 6 colony residents suspended in upright pods of the same translucent biological material she had read about on the Dax recovery report. The same stuff that had coated him in the forest. They were alive. She could see the slow movement of breathing behind the membrane. Their faces were slack, eyes open but unfocused. The expression of people who were present in the meat of themselves, but absent everywhere else. Pod structures had extended anchoring threads into the walls, into the electrical conduit running through the shed's crossbeam, into the communication antenna mounted to the roof. The Veil was networking. These 6 people were nodes. Their nervous systems were being overwritten, slowly to carry a distributed consciousness that would use them as relay points, amplifying the signal, drawing more people into range. The colony's entire population was within range. Marin's hands were shaking. She thought about her data drive. She thought about 2 years of nosebleeds, and dismissed reports, and dreams full of static. She thought about Dax laughing about missing his sister's wedding. She turned away from the pods and started wiring the shed's emergency suppression system to her disruption coil. He was standing behind her when she turned around. Dax was in the doorway, first thing she noticed. Because she knew his face, in the way you know the faces of people who have been constants in your life. Was that the expression on it was wrong, not grotesquely wrong, not monster movie wrong, just wrong in the precise, small way that a word is wrong when you've seen it misspelled. So many times, your brain starts to accept the misspelling. The eyes were looking at her, but they were looking at her the way a sensor looks at a data point, cataloging rather than seeing. "Marin," he said, and the voice was right. The timbre, the register, the slight roughness he got when he'd been quiet for a while. The Veil had studied the voice. "Get out of the doorway, Dax. You have been experiencing the signal." He tilted his head. "We didn't intend that. The carrier frequencies are calibrated for initial contact only. Your resistance creates an echo. I'm flattered. You should come with us. Process is not painful. We've improved it. Since Yantis," a pause, the head tilt corrected itself. "You know about Yantis." "I know about Yantis." She kept her hands still and her voice level. "I know about the Kepler events. I know about the Frontier Survey mission that went dark in 2281. I know you don't destroy what you take. You just relocate it. You move the original out and move yourselves in." She paused. "Where did you put him? Where is Dax?" The face did something complicated. "He is stored. Stored. His cognitive architecture is preserved in." "Is he alive?" Another pause, longer this time. And here was where it got interesting. Because in the pause, something happened in Dax's face that the Veil did not put there. A flicker. A compression around the eyes. That was not calculation but something older than calculation. Something that lived in a different layer. The Veil had Dax's nervous system. It had his memories, his language, his motor patterns. But it had not fully mapped him. It had not understood that a nervous system is not a recording but a living argument, constantly revising itself. That the human brain does not store a person the way a drive stores data, but rather reconstructs that person fresh with every thought. That Dax Okafor's selfhood was not a file the Veil could copy and set aside. It was a process, still running, still insisting on itself even through the occupation. Dax's hand went to his chest. It was not the Veil that did it. It was the gesture he made when something hit him hard. She had seen it 100 times. That reflexive palm to sternum, like he was checking that his heart was still in the right place. "Tell me he's alive," she said quietly. Not an interrogation. Something else. His face cracked open. Not dramatically, just a fissure, just enough. His mouth moved, and what came out was not the Veil's flat information delivery cadence, but something rougher, something that cost him. "Marin, it's very cold where they put me. I can still..." I can still hear everything. Can't. And then the veil reasserted and his face closed again and he stepped forward and said in the measured tone, "That was a data anomaly. It will not recur." "That was Dax," she said. "That was him. He is not in control of this body. No." She reached behind her and connected the final lead on the disruption coil. "But he's still in there. And that means you made a mistake. Took something you thought was just a platform. And it turns out the platform fights back." She looked at him, at Dax, at the thing wearing Dax, at the impossible layered tragedy of the person she had known for 11 years looking at her through eyes that were not entirely his own. "The thing about humans," she said, "is that we don't go quiet. Not completely, not ever." She fired the coil. The pulse went out in a sphere, 10 meters in every direction. A burst of broadband electromagnetic interference at frequencies she had calculated based on the carrier signal she'd been receiving in her own sleep. She did not know if it would work. She had built the coil from relay station components and 3 weeks of theoretical extrapolation and the desperate hope that a signal could be jammed by its own interference pattern. Dax went down like something cut his strings. The pods in the shed, 3 of them ruptured, not violently. The membrane tore from the inside, people within lurching forward into Marin's arms one at a time. Fen Aldrich, the hydroponics tech, and old Vasari, who ran the colony seed archive, both of them gasping and disoriented and alive. 3 pods held. The coil's range hadn't covered the full shed. She dragged the 2 she had to the door, and then went back and hit the coil again from the closer position, and the remaining 3 tore open. And she had 5 people standing on the agricultural margin in the cold air, coughing and shaking and alive. Dax was on the ground in the doorway. She crouched next to him. His breathing was ragged, his eyes unfocused. The fissure was wider now. She could see it, or thought she could, in the unfocused quality of the veil's gaze, the way the expression kept sliding between 2 registers that didn't belong to the same occupant. "Dax." His eyes found her face. "Just for a moment. Get out of there," she said. "Fight it. You've been fighting it for 2 years. Keep going." "I can't." The voice slipped. "They're still in the signal if it reasserts." She understood. The coil had disrupted the local carrier but not destroyed the source. The veil was distributed. She had hit one node. The node would be reclaimed unless she took out the network. She had one more component in her kit. She had brought it on the outside chance she needed it, and had hoped the whole way here that she wouldn't. A thermal initiator, the kind used for controlled demolition of agricultural structures. She pulled it from the kit and looked at the shed, the pods, the networking threads, the antenna, the whole careful architecture of the Veil's local outpost on Halcyon. She looked at Dax. "If I burn it," she said, "the signal collapses. Whatever is in you, it loses its anchor. It might release. It might go with the fire." "Do it," the voice said. And it was his voice. It was completely his, the roughness and everything. "Marin, I heard everything for 2 years. I know what it did. Do it. You might not." A pause. "The wedding. Tell her I watched the video when she sent it. I watched it 6 times. A sound that was almost a laugh. Tell her," I cried. She stood up. She armed the initiator. And she set inside the shed door. And she walked the 5 disoriented survivors to a distance she calculated was sufficient. And she did not look back when the shed went up. She felt the heat on the back of her neck, and she stood with Fen Aldrich and old Vasari and the others, and she watched the network burn. Dax was still breathing when the security team arrived. Vasek worked on him for 4 hours. Protein anomalies were dissolving, she said. The sequences were reverting, close enough to reverting that her instruments were treating them as degradation products rather than active signatures. His nervous system was re-establishing baseline. What that meant for consciousness, for continuity, whether the person who opened his eyes would be the same person who had spent 2 years in cold storage inside his own skull. That, Vasek could not say. Science had words for the body. It didn't have great words for what lived inside it. Marin sat in the corridor outside the medical bay and put her back against the wall and her knees up, and she was still sitting there 6 hours later, when the door opened and Vasek came out and nodded once, very deliberately before going to find more coffee. She went in. Dax was awake. He looked older, not in the way of age, but in the way of weight. The look of someone who had been carrying something enormous for a long time and, had just been allowed to set it down. His eyes found her, and they were his eyes. She was certain of it. They were not cataloging her, but seeing her. "Burn the shed," he said. "I burned the shed. The covas near it are going to need." "I know, I'll file the damage report." A silence. "The good kind." "How long?" he asked. 742 days. He looked at the ceiling. Something moved across his face that she didn't try to name. "It watched everything," he said quietly. "It used my memory to navigate. It knew who to approach, how to talk to them, what to say. It learned from me." A pause. "It thought that was the whole of it. Thought memory was the person. It was wrong." "Yeah." He turned his head to look at her. "You figured that out. You told me. You kept breaking through." "I kept trying." The almost law again. "Humans are annoying like that." She reached into her jacket and put the photograph on the blanket beside him. He looked at it. Him and his sister at the badly maintained fence, both of them laughing. His hand covered it. "The veil," he said after a moment. "That wasn't all of it, was it? That wasn't the whole swarm. Just an advance node." "Yes, so they'll send more." Probably. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the colony was beginning the process of beginning again. Cleanup crews, medical assessments, the long institutional work of recovering from something that didn't have good vocabulary yet. Marin had been asked to lead the xenobiological response team. She had said yes before Vetch finished asking. "Then we'd better be ready," Dax said. She looked at him. 2 years of nosebleeds and dismissed reports and dreams full of static. A coil she had built from relay parts and stubbornness. 6 people alive who should have been walking antennae for something that thought the galaxy was its nervous system. "We've had practice," she said. 3 weeks later, in the Kova forest on the eastern side of the ridge, a maintenance technician running a new relay line found a depression in the soil between 2 root formations. The depression was dry. There was no biological material. There was no trace of anything unusual except for a scorch mark on the bark of the nearest tree. Thin, precise, width and color of a welding arc. The technician photographed it and flagged it for the xenobiology team and continued with the relay line. In the soil at the base of the scorched tree, 2 centimeters beneath the surface, something small and dense and very patient was waiting. It had data from the previous node. It had learned from the failure. It had specifically learned from the human who built the coil. It was still learning, but then so was she.